Yeah, so most people have heard of the three functions of money, and I'm here to tell you why that model is completely wrong. And there are actually four functions. So a lot of people have heard the three-function meme, and it's related to adoption, that first Bitcoin's a store of value, then it's a medium of exchange, and then finally it's a unit of account. And that's worked great so far to be able to have that. And the thing about Bitcoin is Bitcoin's correct. So you can have your memes, and your memes can be wrong, and number will go up regardless. So your memes don't often get corrected. There was an Austrian writer in Cato who published something saying that the three-function model of money is also wrong. It's actually about just the most saleable good. If you look at the three functions historically, there have been quite a few anomalies to how these play out. And the saleable good argument is the medium of exchange argument. That's also what a lot of the shitcoiners like to say, that money's the most saleable good, so it needs to be a medium of exchange. But the thing to consider is, does medium of exchange actually impact your market cap? And so in the previous article, I pointed out, for instance, the Cruzeiro in Brazil. Legally, everything had to be done in the Cruzeiro. Yet it was a terrible fiat. It was highly inflationary, and it wasn't possible to actually do business with this currency. So what people would do is they would actually denominate their contracts in US dollars while they were doing this. In Vietnam, all contracts officially have to be in the dong, yet people still use US dollars. And so you can imagine, what if you lived in a world where everyone knew the dollar is terrible and they only wanted to hold Bitcoin, but for some reason they transacted in dollars. So just in time, before doing a transaction, they convert into dollars, and then immediately afterwards, those dollars get converted into Bitcoin. The market cap of the dollar would collapse, and vice versa. If you hold dollars and use something like Strike because you're maybe a dollar maxi and just need a tool to interface with the Bitcoin world, you send a Bitcoin transaction to someone who maybe uses Strike Commerce or OpenNode, instantly turns that Bitcoin into dollars. So the amount of time that one is holding the asset, that's really what determines the market cap. So Bitstein recently pointed out that medium of exchange and store of value are really coupled, because people use a medium of exchange with intention of having it store value. And if you look at when Austrian thinking originated, it was largely before the internet, where the things that people used as currencies or denominated contracts in were even sometimes physical objects of different varieties. And if you received a physical object of this sort, you knew that you were going to have to hold on to it. And you needed it to have a store of value function. For instance, if you trade a goat with the market, you expect that to be your money for some amount of time. And you think, well, how does this work as money? It has some yield. Maybe I feed it, it gets bigger, has a dividend. Maybe you get goat milk. And people figured out metals were a bit better. But still, you don't have instant liquidity. And so a number of years ago, Junseth posted an article saying, I don't know what money is anymore. And the question is, once you have a deep and liquid enough market across any asset, what does that mean in terms of the implications of store of value? It means that the medium of exchange is not actually supporting the store of value function. It's fully decoupled. And now you do have the internet. So you can take a money that you don't value at all, and as long as you are confident that the market is liquid enough, that decision can be decoupled. Now, I will mention I'm focusing on purely the economic theory of this. In practice, medium of exchange absolutely matters from a sovereignty perspective. If you're using things that aren't Bitcoin, if you're using IOUs of Bitcoin, you're not getting those aspects. But as we talk about adoption and introducing Bitcoin into the real world, and you talk about consumption, the question becomes, what is the other side of a Bitcoin transaction? Since anytime you're outside of an atomic swap, when you're interacting with the physical world, there is security risk. There is no such thing as trustlessness in real business. And so depending on the scope of the business you're trying to conduct, you're still going to have some costs. So here we have, for instance, someone exchanging some unknown powder for some pieces of paper, and maybe a handgun is sufficient to secure it. If you have a private jet, maybe you need an air-to-surface missile. I don't know. I don't have a private jet. Maybe that's not exactly how you secure it. Maybe you have some other mechanism that you use. And if you're moving a lot of cargo, maybe you need a naval destroyer. So these costs add up. And so finally, we have the get on zero meme that not a lot of people are familiar with. But it's the idea that if you hold Bitcoin and you just use dollars as a payment rail, you are still using Bitcoin as your store of value, and that instantaneous transaction doesn't add any market cap to the dollars. And from a risk perspective, you're holding dollars for a very brief amount of time. So there's not much risk in being able to complete your transaction. And so I'd say at this point I've destroyed the model. Now you have from store of value to hyper-Bitcoinization. How do you get there now without the medium of exchange as the next step? Well, if you think about just Bitcoin, as some people do, and talk about the Bitcoin standard, the Bitcoin standard's really simple. It's just everything's in Bitcoin, and Bitcoin's very stable. There's, some NGU and purchasing power as the world grows, but it's very intuitive. What happens is when you get to the transition, it's the singularity. So it's just like in physics. You bring the small to the large, and things are very tricky to understand. And that's what we're approaching in the hyperbolic growth of Bitcoin. I was actually the first person to tweet about that, saying that Bitcoin is hyperbolic. Wicked Smart Bitcoin tweeted a bunch of much nicer graphs and figured out it was a tangent hyperbolic model. So the thing to think about with money is you need to consider the different time horizons that people have and how that relates to store of value. It's actually the medium term where you have volatility. Because if you have the long term, you can be confident something's going to go up. In the short term, actually, the volatility stops being a problem as well. So someone pointed out what is the spending in a talk earlier of some family in El Salvador and how they have no savings. And so this is similar to the get on zero thing, which is if you're instantly spending your money as soon as you get it, volatility doesn't actually hurt you. I ran the numbers on this, and there is a shockingly small number of days where the 24-hour price drop in Bitcoin exceeds 10%. So it's actually extremely stable, both in the short term and in the long term. It's the medium term that gets people. And so you look at how different people hold capital. Poor people and companies are very similar in a key way, which is they have this sort of short time horizon where they know exactly what they need to be spending. A poor person has a very well-defined spending. A company has well-defined operations. It's wealthy individuals who are younger who have this indefinite savings for a long amount of time. And so what are the four functions of money? It's taking the unit of account and breaking that out into both your measure and your standard. And your measure is looking past what has already been done in the world and just taking a note of it. And you can write down anything you want about something that has already happened. But when you have a deferred transaction, then there's volatility. If you specify that a transaction will occur for a certain good, that's dynamic. And so one thought is, can we just, let's just say Bitcoin's amazing, let's do it. We need more Bitcoin. We're going to have a bakery, and that bakery is going to accept Bitcoin, and they will set their prices in Bitcoin. And, it's a small business. It's going to be okay. And they're going to hold their Bitcoin prices forever. Someone posted this on Stacker News, actually, this question. And so can you have adoption be individuals throughout the world who then individually decide as a group, we are going to make Bitcoin 100% of our standard of value? And the answer is no. That business will go bankrupt. That business will fail because, as we know, there will be NGU and there will also be downturns as well. And they will not be able to carry out their business. They have to use dollars. And even Bitcoin businesses hold dollars because their liabilities are in dollars. And that's how they get zero liability in dollar terms. And all the debts globally are largely dollars. But if you went to 99% US dollar standard of value, you actually wouldn't have too much of a problem. Because if you owe someone Bitcoin, that's going to be a problem operationally. If you owe someone 1% of a contract in a fixed amount of Bitcoin, that's a lot less of an issue. So the thing is, are you going to have pairs of individuals doing these failing businesses and someday suddenly not failing? Or will you have something where you fractionalize the transactions? So you look at an aggregate. An aggregate gives you properties that aren't found in any of the components. Take a straw mud hut. The straw is brittle, so is the mud. Both would collapse on their own, but you combine them, and now you go from something that's two brittle materials to a nonlinear damageable material. It's fantastic. And you can do a similar thing with money. You can combine sats, dollars, ribeyes, anything. You can make a composite money. And this is something that William Jevons suggested in 1875, yet Bitcoiners don't talk about it at all. He was one of the first people behind the marginal revolution, and he was also a logician, unlike some of the other Austrians. I don't know why he's forgotten. And he mentioned that you could have these fractional currencies, which, if you take the end game of what do fractional currencies get to, you would eventually get to something which is sound money, which is an index of everything. So businesses can't operate on a weak currency. So Boeing, a few years ago, thought that they were going to be clever and underbid on the TX trainer, and they're taking billions in losses because what they did is they said, we're going to manufacture aircraft and deliver those for a fixed dollar price. And their costs went up, and the dollar went down, and so they got screwed. If you look at the bulkhead of an F-35, it takes about 24 months from start to finish. So you need to have something that takes into account this time aspect of what are all the counterparties holding. This is just a layout of how I was working on something related to salaries and looking at how that would break down and having a resetting swap agreement. And Wicked Smart Bitcoin asked about this on Twitter just a few days ago, which is, if you could lock in your payments for Bitcoin, would you do that? And people would do that even if they get less Bitcoin. And getting less Bitcoin, that's why people will do this. Because there is surplus value in every economic transaction that is being destroyed and lost that could exist if people had the tools to create fractional currencies in their contracts. So Michael Saylor says, there is no second best. But people holding the dollar today will tell you there is no second best to the dollar. And actually, those people are correct too. There is no second best to denominating a contract that's long-term in dollars. Because if you try to use 100% Bitcoin today, your business will die. It's very clear. The only thing that's better in the non-equilibrium stage is a composite. So if you want to be able to play longer-term games with longer-term people, you need to build these tools. Because what happens is people's time preference shrinks. This isn't an issue in spot contracts, but the entire world cannot run on spot contracts. If you want to build things that really create value, you need to have the tools to plan for that future. And if you look at how this would be enacted with the types of contracts, there's very strong fundamental protections where it's really hard to prevent someone from introducing this fractionality of the denomination in a contract. It might be tedious to develop from a software perspective, but it can be done. And so people need tools that simplify and abstract some of this. And so I just want to make some notes. So I was previously trying to do a startup related to this. This is the key thing for adoption. But Bitcoiners say a lot of dumb things, like airplanes are the same since 1971. No, they aren't. And I have to argue with people about how turbine blades, they used to be polycrystalline, now then they switched to monocrystalline nickel-based superalloys, and now they're silicon carbide. This is a huge shift. And so if you're talking about fixing things, you need to have some grasp of reality and where the world is today. Because as the wealth keeps going up, that means there's less of a pressure for Bitcoin, because people say, it's not all that bad. And so I used to do materials, built some really high performance materials, and I realized Bitcoin is the key to unlocking everything. And so I tried Bitcoin, and then I ruptured my Achilles about a year ago mountain biking in British Columbia, and I shifted from my time horizon from this indefinite perspective to needing a more definite thing where the Bitcoin, maybe I'm not able to do that, so now everyone knows about standard of contract. It's last night I tweeted about this, the oil, you know, it's, you have the seed oils, you have the fake olive oil, and you try to, oh, looks like it wasn't olive oil. So look, if Bitcoiners can't even fix the oil, how are they going to fix everything else? So there's just some things to think about.
Thank you.
Excellent. No, here, I just did that to him, but that was great.